After my husband died, my son was always my support, until the night he knocked over his father's portrait and roared, "The show's over." I still remember the day my husband, Jean-Luc, passed away. I thought my world would collapse, but in the darkest of days, I realized how lucky I was. I wasn't alone. My daughter, Camille, despite being busy with university, spent almost all her free time by my side. Every weekend morning, she would come home and make me a hot cup of tea. Her devotion was my greatest comfort. And Etienne, my busy son, also warmed my heart. Even though his business in the city kept him preoccupied, he would drive home to visit almost every weekend. He always brought peonies, my favorite flowers, and patiently listened for hours as I told him old stories. He asked about my health, about Camille's studies, about everything. Seeing my two children, one taking care of me nearby, the other not minding the long drive to visit, I felt I was the happiest mother alive. I had a solid foundation. The pain of losing Jean-Luc was still there, but the love of my children helped me stand strong. I had believed that we were a real family, united and loving. I had believed that I would live out my final years in this peace. But then, a crack began to appear. About a year ago, Etienne started complaining about his business. "My company is about to go bankrupt, Mother," he said, his voice full of weariness during one of his visits. At the same time, he began asking about Jean, Luc's assets. "Father was such a clever banker," he said. "Surely he must have left something behind, right? A secret account? Some investments you didn't know about?" I answered him honestly, which was what I believed at the time. "No, Etienne. Your father invested everything in his company, and after he died, everything was just enough to get by. Besides this house and the scholarship fund for you two, we have nothing left." I repeated that answer many times, and I noticed, after each time, Etienne's attitude would grow a little colder. The bouquets of peonies became fewer and farther between. The phone calls also decreased. His care disappeared, replaced by irritability and distance. I tried to tell myself it was due to work pressure, but the peace I once felt was slowly fading. That coldness reached its peak one Friday evening. Etienne burst into the house, reeking of alcohol. His face was etched with the despair and fury of a man who had lost all patience. He threw a stack of debt collection bills onto the dining table. "The show's over, old woman!" he roared, no longer calling me mother. "For all these years, I had to play the part of the devoted son, listening to your useless ramblings, all for nothing. You're just like that old man, useless and broke." He turned to me. "Withdraw the money from Camille's scholarship fund. Right now, I need it." I put down my knife and fork and looked him straight in the eye. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "That's your sister's future." Etienne let out a dry, distorted laugh, twisted by alcohol and resentment. "Her future? Her future is marrying some guy and living off him, just like you." He slammed his hand on the table and stood up, the chair scraping loudly as it fell backward. "Do you know?" he yelled, his drunkenness shattering every veneer of civilization. "The day that old man had his heart attack, I was there." What was he saying? I sat there, stunned, his words like shards of glass embedded in my mind. I begged him, just a little, to pay off my gambling debts. But he refused. He pointed at the wedding photo of me and Jean-Luc. He was lying there, clutching his chest, gasping for air. His medicine was right on the table. He wouldn't have died if I had wanted him to. But I thought, if he dies, at least I'll get an inheritance. But no! In the end, it was just the same useless, poor people. He wouldn't have died if I had wanted him to. That sentence hit me like a sledgehammer. He wasn't just there. He witnessed it. He could have saved his father, and he chose to do nothing, all for gambling debts. Camille quickly stood up, her voice trembling, and shielded me. "Stop it! What are you saying?" "Get out of the way," Etienne roared, and a deafening slap echoed in the silent room. She fell to the floor. That act of violence was like a jolt, pulling me out of my shock. I saw the real monster standing before me. He didn't stop. He came closer, snatching my handbag. "Where's the savings book? I need money. They'll kill me if I don't pay the debt." "What are you doing, Etienne?" Camille sobbed, her voice breaking. "Get out of my life," he roared, finally finding the savings book. He grabbed the book. Before leaving, he threw a glass of red wine at our wedding photo. The dark red liquid streamed down our happy faces, like a bleeding wound. "Thanks for raising me," he said with a mocking tone, then threw a few small bills at my feet. "That's a tip for you." He turned and walked straight out the door, leaving behind a shattered silence. After that horrifying night, Etienne disappeared. He had gotten the savings book, and I no longer wanted to see his face. Almost 2 years passed in heavy silence, a silence I tried to fill by taking care of Camille. Then one morning, I received a call from Mr. Dubois, the family lawyer. "Mrs. Elise," he said, his voice solemn, "it has been exactly 2 years since Mr. Jean-Luc passed away. According to his will, it's time for us to execute a special clause. Please be present at my office with your children tomorrow afternoon." I was stunned, holding the phone, unable to speak. A special clause? Jean-Luc had never told me about this. My heart pounded, a mix of anxiety and curiosity rising within me. The next day, at the lawyer's office, I saw Etienne again. He looked thinner and more haggard, but his eyes still held a hint of arrogance. When Camille bowed in greeting, he just gave a dismissive nod. He must have thought this was a meeting to divide the remaining assets, and he came to claim his share. He looked at me with a triumphant air, as if I had been frightened and had to call him back to split everything. Mr. Dubois began, his voice serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, as requested by Mr. Jean-Luc, this will is to be announced only 2 years after his death." He opened a leather briefcase and took out a sealed document. "The will states," he read, "that after my death, my true entire assets, plot," he emphasized the word true, "will be secretly managed by a trust fund." I was stunned, turning to look at Mr. Dubois. His true entire assets? I had always thought we only had the house and the scholarship fund left. Jean-Luc had never told me about any other trust fund. A feeling of shock washed over me. Etienne burst out laughing, a gleeful and brazen laugh, interrupting my thoughts. "Ha, I knew it. I knew that old man couldn't have had nothing. He hid the assets so well." He slapped his hand on the table, then turned to me and Camille with a commanding look. "See? I told you. My patience has finally paid off." While Etienne was celebrating, I felt an immense weariness. Money again, assets again. His greed had once again resurfaced, even more naked than it was 2 years ago. I no longer had the strength to fight. I just wanted this to be over. "For 2 years, Mr. Dubois continued, his eyes on the will, "Mrs. Elise will continue to manage the common assets. After 2 years, Mrs. Elise has the right, for one time only, to declare a waiver of management of the entire estate." Etienne immediately turned to me, his eyes urging me impatiently. "Mother, did you hear that? Waive your rights. Hurry up, so the assets can be divided legally among the children." He was right. I didn't want to be involved with him anymore. I didn't want to face this greedy monster for another day. I was too tired. I looked at Camille, who also looked exhausted. "Mr. Dubois," I said, my voice full of weariness, "I don't want to manage anything anymore. I'm too old and tired." I turned to Etienne. "You want the assets, don't you? Fine. Let them be divided by law. And then," I said, as if releasing a final burden, "I, Elise von Schmidt, officially waive my right to manage the assets." Etienne smiled triumphantly. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and waited for his victory. But Mr. Dubois spoke again. "According to the final clause of the covenant, when and only when Mrs. Elise waives her right to manage, this sealed envelope will be opened. The letter inside will determine the legal and sole heir of the entire estate." The smile on Etienne's lips froze. "Sole?" he stammered, sitting up straight. I was also stunned. "Sole? Jean-Luc, did you even calculate this? How profound was your plan?" Mr. Dubois, with great solemnity, took the red wax-sealed envelope from the table. He carefully broke the seal. He took out a single sheet of paper, opened it, and read the name written on it aloud. "Camille von Schmidt." The smile on Etienne's face shattered. He sat frozen in his chair, motionless as a statue. His self-satisfaction, his greed, all vanished. All that remained was the naked collapse of a king who had just been dethroned on the very throne he thought was his. The deathly silence in the room was torn apart by a furious roar. Etienne jumped to his feet, the chair scraping loudly as it fell backward. His face was flushed, his eyes wild with anger and disbelief. "No way!" he screamed, pointing at me. "This is a fraud! You manipulated my father! You conspired with this old lawyer to steal what belongs to me." Mr. Dubois stood up, his voice stern. "Mr. Etienne, please calm down. This is your father's legal will." "Legal?" Etienne laughed maniacally. "A will that gives the entire fortune to a girl who hasn't even graduated, while disinheriting the only son." He turned to me, his eyes filled with hatred. "You think you've won? Not yet. I'll sue to get back what's rightfully mine. I'll prove to everyone that you've lost your mind." I looked at him, my son consumed by greed. For the last time, I tried. "Etienne, don't," I said, my voice weary. "Don't sue. It's useless. It won't do you any good." But he just scoffed, suspicion and contempt clear in his eyes. "Useless? Are you scared? Are you scared I'll win? Scared I'll get the inheritance? You can't fool me." He didn't understand that I was trying to save him from the final truth, a truth more painful than losing money. He only thought I was trying to protect the assets for myself. While Etienne was screaming hysterically, Camille sat beside me, trembling. She didn't look at the huge numbers on the papers. She only looked at her brother, then at me, pained by the raw breakdown of our family. Etienne slammed his hand down on the table one last time and stormed out of the room, leaving a lingering threat. "You'll regret this. We'll meet in court." The door slammed shut. I had given him one last chance to stop, and he refused. The battle had officially begun. Etienne kept his word. Exactly 1 week later, I received a court summons. My son had actually sued his own mother, accusing me of legal incompetence and asking the court to invalidate my waiver of management. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was solemn and cold. I sat at the defendant's table with Mr. Dubois and Camille. She held my hand tightly. Her hand was icy cold. Across from us, Etienne sat with his lawyer, a slick and cunning man. He didn't look at me, only stared straight at the judge with the resolute expression of a victim. And his act began. Etienne's lawyer stood up, starting to build an emotional story. He described Etienne not as a greedy person, but as a devoted, dutiful son who had spent many years caring for his frail mother after his father passed away. "Your Honor," he said, his voice full of sympathy, "my client has always been by his mother's side. He put his own opportunities aside to visit her often. He began to present evidence, one thing after another. Photos of Etienne bringing me flowers, the smile on his face looking so sincere. Bills for expensive gifts. A call history showing he had called me almost every week for 2 years. This is the act of a son who loves his mother," his lawyer concluded. But then, suddenly and inexplicably, Mrs. Elise decided to strip him of his entire inheritance. An irrational act, which can only be explained by a mental decline due to age and grief. My client is not suing for money. He is suing because he is worried about his mother. He only wants to protect her from her own wrong decisions. It was a perfect performance. They had turned Etienne's fake emotional investment into evidence of his filial piety. They were trying to paint me as a senile, bitter old woman who had cast aside her own loving son. I sat in silence, listening, feeling the judge's scrutinizing gaze. Their show was very convincing, but they didn't know that I also had a show of my own. And the best part was yet to come. After Etienne's lawyer finished his emotional presentation, the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Elisa, do you have anything to say?" I slowly stood up. I didn't look at the judge. I didn't look at the lawyer either. I looked straight at Etienne, who sat with the confidence that he was about to win. I didn't defend my actions. I didn't explain my weariness or frustration. Instead, I asked a question, my voice clear in the silence of the courtroom. "Etienne, have you ever wondered why your father, a man who loved you dearly, would create such a strange and somewhat cruel clause in his will?" Etienne frowned, a little confused by my question. His lawyer was about to stand up and object, but the judge signaled him to sit down. "What are you trying to say?" Etienne asked, his voice a little irritable. I'm asking you, I continued, why did your father set up a test? And why did he give the sole decision-making power to me? I didn't wait for him to answer. I turned to Mr. Dubois. Mr. Dubois, please present the next piece of evidence to the court. Mr. Dubois stepped forward and placed a large envelope on the judge's desk. Your Honor, this is the result of a secret DNA test performed at my client's request, comparing the DNA sample of Mr. Etienne and the deceased father, Mr. Jean-Luc. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Etienne jumped up. What? DNA? You had to resort to such dirty tricks? He laughed maniacally. Do you think a fake piece of paper can change anything? I am his son. No, Etienne, I said, my voice no longer holding anger, only a deep sadness. You're not. The judge opened the envelope, read the results, then looked up at me with an astonished expression. The entire courtroom fell into silence. Etienne and Camille were frozen. And then I told the truth, a secret I had buried for 30 years. Jean-Luc created that clause, I said, my voice trembling, because he knew you are not his biological son. I revealed everything. Etienne was the son of me and a former lover. When I became pregnant, Jean-Luc found out. Instead of divorcing me, he made a covenant. He looked at me and said that a child was innocent. He would accept Etienne, give him his name, and love and raise him as his own. In return, I had to swear I would never let this secret affect Camille, his only biological daughter. I turned to look at Etienne, who was petrified. Jean-Luc kept his promise, I said, my voice now sharp with indignation. He gave you a name, a family, a life you should have never had. He loved you with everything he had. I paused, taking a deep breath. And how did you repay him? By letting him die of a heart attack, all for gambling debts. By trampling on the future of your own sister, the daughter he loved most. A person like you, I said, my voice firm, does not deserve anything from the legacy of that great man. I looked at the judge, then back at Etienne, the final pieces of the puzzle suddenly becoming clear in my mind. Now I understand, I said, my voice filled with a new realization. I, too, was unaware of the existence of that huge trust fund. I had always thought we had nothing left. Perhaps Jean-Luc did it on purpose. He hid that fortune from all of us. This strange will clause, I continued, the logic pouring out, was not just a test for you, Etienne. Perhaps it was also a test for me. He wanted to see, when I had nothing in my hands, when faced with your cruelty, if I would be strong enough to protect Camille. He gave me the final say, trusting that I would do the right thing. I looked straight into my son's eyes. And your actions that night. You signed your own sentence and showed me clearly the path Jean-Luc wanted me to choose. After my testimony, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. All eyes were on Etienne. His show had completely collapsed. The fake filial evidence his lawyer presented now seemed ridiculous. The judge, without another word, delivered her verdict. The case is dismissed, she declared, her voice sharp. Etienne no longer screamed. He was no longer angry. He just sat there, motionless, like an empty shell. He had lost everything in one afternoon. The huge fortune he had just learned about. The honor of being a son. And most painful of all, the very identity he had always been proud to carry. He was not a von Schmidt. He was just an illegitimate child who had been taken in, a betrayer who had destroyed the kindness he had received. When the trial ended, he quietly stood up. He didn't look at me, nor at Camille. He just walked away, trudging like a ghost, out of the courtroom. He left the courthouse and disappeared from our lives forever. That evening, after the chaos had settled, Camille gently knocked on my door. She came in, holding a hot cup of chamomile tea, just like she always did. But this time, something was different. She didn't ask about the money, the trust fund, or the future. She just sat down on the side of the bed, placed the tea on the table, and looked at me. Her clear eyes identical to Jean-Luc's, held a deep understanding I had never seen before. "Mom," she whispered, "how long have you had to live with this secret?" That simple question, not a reproach, but an act of sharing, broke down the wall I had built around my heart for 30 years. Tears began to stream down my cheeks. I told her everything about the pain, the guilt, and the burden of keeping my promise to her father, about Jean, Luke's love, and his sacrifice. Camille just listened in silence, her hand holding mine tightly, giving me warmth. When I finished, she hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Mom," she sobbed. "I'm sorry I didn't realize. I'm sorry you had to endure it alone." In that embrace, I felt the burden of 30 years vanish. The relationship between us was no longer the one-sided care of a devoted daughter for a frail mother. It had become empathy, understanding, and a solid foundation for each other. We had lost a husband, a father, a brother. But in that loss, we had truly found each other. In the months that followed, Camille matured in an astonishing way. The burden of the inheritance didn't crush her. On the contrary, it seemed to ignite the flame of responsibility that Jean, Luc had seen in her. With my guidance and Mr. Dubois, Camille began to learn how to manage the estate. She not only looked after her own future, but also wanted her father's legacy to have a greater meaning. A year after the trial, I sat in the front row of a luxurious auditorium. On the stage, Camille, in a formal dress, stood at the microphone, confident and composed. She was no longer the shy girl she once was. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out, warm and strong. "Today, we are launching the Elise Foundation. The foundation is named after my mother, a woman who taught me about the power of silence, resilience, and forgiveness." She looked down at me and smiled. "The Elise Foundation will dedicate all its resources to providing legal and financial support for single mothers and their children who have suffered from betrayal and injustice. Because the greatest legacy we can leave behind is not money, but hope and strength for those who follow." I looked at my daughter, the true heir of both Jean, Luke's blood, and his legacy of honor, shining brightly. I knew my husband, somewhere, was smiling. His chess game had ended, and true love had won.